The ingredients are simultaneously melted down and agitated, the other crucial steps in reconstituting the cheese matrix.
And it makes almost a plastic homogeneous mass in the cooker, and it's very, very hot at that point.
From now on, the processed cheese will remain smooth and homogeneous. And whether it's a processed cheese spread or a slice, it will have supreme meltability. The first processed cheese was introduced in 1915 by the man who would go on to impact the history of cheese more than any other individual, James L. Kraft. Kraft's cheese career began in Chicago in 1903, when he invested $65 in a horse and cart and began peddling cheese to local grocers. But Kraft wasn't satisfied with the available product.
There was not a lot of consistency in terms of flavor and the quality of the cheese that was being produced at that time. And there was also a problem with the short shelf life of cheese.
In 1911, Kraft began experimenting with a heat-sterilized cheese that could be sold in a can. But the heating caused the fats and proteins to separate. Eventually, Kraft discovered that constant stirring and the use of emulsifiers solved the problem. Kraft soon landed a contract to supply the U.S. Army with 6 million pounds of the non-perishable cheese during the First World War.
And this was a significant contract that really helped J.L. Kraft develop the business.
The business quickly became an empire. By 1923, J.L. Kraft was running the largest cheese company in the world. Then in 1928, Kraft introduced the soft, golden processed cheese loaf with the mellifluous name, Velveeta.
What was unique about Velveeta was the fact that the whey byproduct was put back into the cheese while it was being made. And what the scientists found out was that it produced a cheese with an unusual creamy texture, and an additional benefit was the nutritional benefits that Velveeta offered.
Incredibly, by 1930, 40% of all cheese eaten in America was made by Kraft. Kraft engineers also introduced all the major technologies used to make processed cheese, including the continuous screw-driven cooker still used today. As if that weren't enough, a Kraft scientist also revolutionized the surprisingly high-tech art of making cream cheese.
In the 1940s, Oscar J. Link invented the centrifugal separation process for cream cheese, which allowed us to separate the whey from the cream cheese in 15 seconds versus the hours it had previously taken. He also invented a unique heating process, which allowed us to extend the shelf life of the product to 120 days.
Cream cheese is a natural, not processed cheese. But making a perfectly creamy schmear is far from simple. And it's done without the use of cream. The key is using bacteria to carefully manipulate the electric charges present in the milk.
Those charges normally in milk are all negative charges, or enough of them are negative charges. And so like charges repel. They don't like to come close to each other, and they repel each other. That keeps them stable, and that's why milk stays a liquid and not a gel until the bacteria come along and produce some acid. That changes some of these charge groups on the protein to positive charges, and now they start to get attractive and start to stick together.
When the charges are balanced, the mixture congeals into a perfectly creamy state. Not runny, not stiff. At that point, it's quickly heated, killing the bacteria and creating cream cheese. In 1940, Norman Kraft, James's younger brother, designed the unique chill roll system to make a product he'd envisioned for years: pre-sliced cheese.
The heated processed cheese would flow onto a large refrigerated cylinder, what was called a chill roll. And so it would create a sheet of processed cheese that was very quickly chilled. And that sheet was then cut into ribbons. And then the long ribbons were cut crosswise into sandwich-shaped squares that were then stacked in stacks of 8 slices usually, and then wrapped and packaged in that way. And it sounds simple, but it was really quite innovative at the time.
The design breakthrough is still the method for making processed cheese slices. When the product was finally unveiled in 1950, it became a sensation and then a staple. Its familiar blend of cheddar with dairy and non-dairy ingredients even became known as American cheese. Today, individual cheese slices are still a hefty slice of Kraft's business.
On an annual basis, Kraft produces about 7.2 billion American slices a year. And, my rough calculations would have that stretching end-to-end stretch around the earth about 14 times.
Kraft's Cheese Whiz for dozens of cheese dishes and snacks fast. It's a brand new idea in food, entirely different from anything you've ever had before.
In 1952, Kraft introduced Cheese Whiz, a high-moisture processed cheese spread made with additional stabilizers.
This tantalizing pasteurized processed cheese spread is grand in any sandwich.
Cheese Whiz is primarily, here in the States, used as a topping cheese, as a sauce for vegetables, potatoes. Broccoli and potatoes are really the way that it's used.
Over the years, processed cheese has taken some hits to its image. Critics argue that it's greatly limited the American palate, while putting the squeeze on natural cheesemakers. But it continues to thrive. It's even earned the admiration of at least one world-renowned cheese connoisseur.
I mean, I grew up on Velveeta. I love Velveeta. I mean, a Dr. Pepper and a peanut butter sandwich and a big slab of Velveeta and some comic books, and I'm a happy boy.
To countless millions of people, happiness is a hot pizza or a cool caprese salad. The secret to happiness? It's the cheese. Just ask her. In the early 20th century, America's traditional cheesemakers urged the federal government to label the newly modified cheese products as embalmed cheese. The government settled on processed cheese. Quick, what's the most popular cheese in the United States? Cheddar? American? Guess again. That's right. Thanks almost entirely to our undying love of pizza, the once obscure Italian cheese known as mozzarella has stretched its way to the top. It's hardly surprising when you consider that Americans eat about 100 acres of pizza per day. Over a year, that's enough to cover every square inch of Manhattan with pizza. Twice. And so back at Wisconsin's Alto Dairy, they make pizzeria-grade cow's milk mozzarella around the clock.
We make approximately 250,000 pounds of mozzarella per day. On an annual basis, that comes to 96 million pounds in a year's time. And to put it on pizza terms, we produce enough mozzarella per day to cover 500,000 pizzas.
Mozzarella is known as a pasta filata, or stretched curd cheese. A machine called a cooker stretcher heats the curd to 136 degrees, melting it. Constant mechanical pulling turns the melted curd into a stretchy mass.
When it leaves the mixer and cookers, it's got this massive stringy texture to it. And that's what people like to see.
The hot curd is molded into blocks. To preserve mozzarella's soft, springy texture, the blocks are gently coaxed into a cool, salty canal. The 4-hour brine bath halts the cooking and fermentation. Once cooled, the blocks of mozzarella are packaged and aged for about a week. Much of the cheese then takes a run through the shredder and into a vacuum-sealed 5-pound bag. The next stop is a 500-degree oven at your local pizzeria. To create a slightly browned, perfectly stretchy mozzarella, the cheesemakers not only have to melt and stretch the curd just so, they must also guide the starter bacteria into breaking down the tightly bound milk proteins, called caseins, as well as calcium.
Because calcium is the glue that holds the casein structure together in cheese. If you don't remove some of that glue with acid during the make procedure, the fermentation, the proteins are held tightly and they can't stretch and flow. If you remove all of it, then it just falls apart. Here's how we would quantify it. We'd put a ruler by it like this. We'd grab some cheese and we'll see how high it goes up before the last strand breaks, which is right there, which was 13 inches. Try it one more time. Even a little more, 16 inches. So we take a number of readings, average them, and that would give us our empirical reading for this particular pizza bake. This is pretty close to what many people would consider an almost perfect pizza. But the only way to really tell that is to get the human involved to taste it. So. It's good. Pizza's on, so dig in.
Despite the runaway popularity of pizza, the essence of this remarkable cheese remains: fresh mozzarella di bufala. Say hello to the Asian water buffalo. This gentle giant, not the cow, is the original source of authentic fresh mozzarella. Ever since the Goths brought water buffalo to the Naples region in the early medieval era, Italian cheesemakers have been making mozzarella di bufala.
We do not even know exactly when the tradition started, but we can say that at least 1,000 years ago, we have traces that water buffalo mozzarella existed already in the form that it exists right now.
Water buffalo milk is prized for its sweet, rich, and slightly gamey flavor. It's perfect for fresh mozzarella, which, unlike the pizza variety, is a non-aged, higher moisture, higher fat cheese meant to be enjoyed immediately. A small California cheese company named Bubalis Bubalis, after the water buffalo's scientific name, makes 600 pounds of fresh mozzarella every day. About what the Alto Dairy produces in 4 minutes. Once the curd enters the cooker stretcher, the instincts and timing of the cheesemaker are everything.
He adds about 200-degree hot water to it so that the curd will again become soft and stretchable, and then he'll add salt to it. He will stretch it to the point where he feels that it is good to form it into individual balls.
The automated arms of the cooker stretcher are modeled on human hands, the traditional tools for stretching and tearing fresh mozzarella.
And this is the precise moment when you cut the mozzarella. And this is why mozzarella is called mozzarella, because you mozzi, meaning you cut. Because mozzare means to cut in Italian. So that's the reason they call it like that.
Both handmade and automated methods finish in the same way.
They drop into ice water. The ice water basically, by the shock of it, because the curd is pretty hot still coming from the cheese mass, it will develop a skin on the outside, which is kind of typical for the mozzarella di bufala. Today we get a nice skin on the outside.
Bubalis Bubalis also makes its own buffalo milk ricotta. Ricotta is unique among cheeses in that it's made entirely from the discarded whey, rather than the curds.
This whey, of course, which is a leftover after we make the curd, is still contains a very large amount, of course, of protein. This whey we then put into a separate tank, a ricotta tank, where we heat it up to 198 degrees. And at that point, we add some salt and some citric acid to it. The protein, which is in that whey still, will coagulate one more time. So that coagulant is basically ricotta cheese.
While ricotta has been made out of whey for centuries, the booming whey industry is just getting started as cheese forges ahead into a new health-conscious millennium. In 1970, Americans ate 1.2 pounds per capita of mozzarella cheese. By 2005, the amount had increased to 10.2 pounds. For centuries, whey has been treated mostly as a waste product, once drained from the valuable cheese curd. Considering that 90% of the milk used in cheese making will end up as whey, that's a lot of waste. After all, it was good enough for Little Miss Muffet. Today, that whey finds new life, thanks to operations like the one at the Alto Dairy, which uses a 6-story high dryer to create whey powder, at the rate of 250,000 pounds per day.
This Filtermat is one of the largest Filtermat dryers in the world, and it will dry approximately 12,000 pounds of powder per hour. We're essentially spraying thick whey product that's approximately half water, half solids. We're spraying it in a stream of very hot air, approximately 400 degrees, and as that product is falling through the air, the moisture in it is evaporating off and it is converting it into a powder.
Whey powder consists of about 12% protein, the rest being mostly milk sugars and minerals, such as calcium and magnesium. This former waste stream will become blended into countless prepared foods, from bread to sausages. Among its many uses, whey can act as a sweetener or a thickening agent, while providing essential protein and minerals. Whey proteins can be further concentrated into whey protein isolates, the ingredient of choice in fitness products. Whey isn't the only food getting a healthy makeover. Nutritional aspects of cheese itself are also expanding. There's no getting around the fact that cheese contains a lot of fat. That's just the nature of the beast. But scientists at the Wisconsin Center for Dairy Research are working with dairy farmers and cheesemakers to squeeze more nutrition from that fat by boosting cheese's levels of omega-3 fatty acids, the healthy fat.
You can get it in 2 different methods. You can get it through a feeding regimen of feeding dairy cattle, a diet high in flaxseed, and what you get is an elevated level of ALA, omega-3 fatty acid. The other way to incorporate it is something seed generated, either through fish or algae extracts.
Scientists have even figured out how to isolate and remove any trace of a fishy smell. There's also increased interest in making cheese with beneficial probiotic cultures, like those found in yogurt.
It's a big trend in Europe for a few years, but in the United States, it's just starting to take hold right now.
Cheese, with its longer shelf life, is proving to be a good storage system for these healthy bacteria. Science and technology notwithstanding, cheese will always be shaped by the creativity of the individual cheesemaker. Cheese will also continue to be shaped by the land and the animals from which it came.
I find it amazing that the animal can take on all the bacteria in the air and all the yeast in the air and the esters from the wildflowers that it eats and the esters from the wild garlics and wild leeks, translate it through the mammal lactation and into the milk and into the fat and into the cheese so that we can recognize them in terms of finish flavor and what give cheese its complexity and its character. I think that's really interesting. It's magic.
It's been around a long time. There's a reason for that. It's good food. God made man, man made cheese.
And billions of blissful cheese lovers couldn't be happier.